Well, you're chair of the Department of Political Science, cross appointments to International Development and SPT, founding director of the International Secretariat for Human Development. And your most recent books are Human Development and Social Power Perspectives from South Asia and Business Regulation and Non-State Actors, Whose Standards, Whose Development. Professor Reed, Darryl, you're Associate Professor in Business and Society program here at York in the Division of Social Science. You have 2 PhDs, I was impressed to learn, right? One in political economy and public policy, and one in social ethics, both from the University of Southern California. And I gather the connection here, but correct me if I'm wrong, is that you were a visiting fellow at the Management Center for Human Values at the Indian Institute of Management in Calcutta. I don't know if that has anything to do with the fact that you're...
It goes back earlier than that.
Okay.
We were graduate students together in Southern California.
Oh. Well, another thing that interests me is that you seem to be heavily involved, from my perspective anyway, in academic publishing as a member of several editorial boards and a reviewer for both journals and presses. And I don't think very many faculty members have that many publishing credentials in terms of serving the publishing industry per se.
I only do it because it pays so well.
Yes, I know, I understand. You know, it's a powerful position. Well, I think I can safely say that both of you are interested in the idea of what's often called people-centered economy, or economies. Can you tell me what that means, first of all, and in a few words, what sparked your interest? And let me start with you, Ananya.
You know, when I think of how all this work started, I come from India and from a city called Calcutta, which is now actually called Kolkata. And I grew up in this, an urban, fairly progressive, very politicized milieu, where it was just so much a part of our lives that you know, we had to be relevant to the problems around us, that we had to contribute in some way. And the most important thing around that, which we grew up thinking about, is how could ordinary people have some kind of say in the democracy that we lived in, and how could they have some kind of real control on their livelihoods, on their productive lives. Now, growing up in India, as you can imagine, the democratic fervor was always very strong. So people were actually very seriously participants in a democratic process, irrespective of their social and economic position. But there was a very strong discrepancy between people's possibility of economic participation, economic control, and their political participation. And this, I think, has always been my what has driven me, that the democracy must be about real control on one's livelihoods and not only just the ballot box. And with that, I studied economics, and then I took on political economy and development. And then through the academic work, that was the one question that always interested me is, yes, we have this fantastic growth, we have a modern economy. India then was also doing well, now it's supposedly doing a lot better. But it doesn't really give that ordinary citizen the power over his or her own life. So that's what has really driven all my work in academia and outside.
Mm-hmm. And Darryl, how would you define people-centered economy? Is there a definition?
That's one term. I tend to more talk about the social economy. Mm-hmm. So people-centered economy is more of a newer term. And last year, for example, there was a major conference in Ottawa around the people-centered economy, but the more typical term that we tend to use these days is around the social economy. And that, like most terms in academia and in social movements, is contested, and there's different traditions. But the social economy tends to look at businesses that are not oriented towards making profits. They have a social purpose. And so that can include sort of democratically controlled enterprises, which would be things like mutuals and associations and cooperatives. But it can also include organizations which are not democratically controlled necessarily, so a whole range of social entrepreneurships. And then there's also the nonprofits, which have other types of organizations. But what they all have in common is that they are engaged in business for some sort of social purpose rather than for maximizing shareholder value, as we tend to think of the mandate of traditional businesses.
However, the people who are engaged in maximizing the value of the assets under their control will tell you that that is a social enterprise.
They will.
And we would disagree.
Well, it's obviously more complicated than that, and not to say that conventional businesses don't have very important roles to play. And there's a range of experiences there, but our focus is more on these businesses which specifically see their role as a social good. For the other businesses, that is almost a side effect of their mandate to maximize shareholder value.
And oftentimes now it's become very fashionable to say that, you know, corporations are also doing social good. Often it's in response to some kind of social pressure. It is not, as he said, it's a side effect and certainly not their priority. They sometimes might be pushed into making concessions because they're pushed into it by social movements. But in the social economy, the goal would be to prioritize the social outcome rather than private gain.
A lot of people are concerned about the kind of rationalist notion of the market economy as a synthesizer of virtue and the values of the corporation and the market being imposed on the university. I would take it that you're both interested in that issue.
Yes.
Do you have anything to comment about that? Or do we have to go outside there to talk about that?
Yeah, well, no, we've actually written some things on that as well. And again, it gets the question of the nature. People will speak about the corporatization of universities. And is it taking on more of the structures of private sector enterprises? Is it copying their strategic approaches or approaches to management and things like this, rather than having this public sector? And that's obviously a huge debate, which Dean Fallis obviously has written about, and others at York as well. So we are very concerned about that. More importantly, though, on the more positive side, we also think about the spaces that universities provide us to do other things, so to investigate the other sides of business and how they can support alternative models of business as well. Because in universities, it's a very strange situation where we have business schools that actually educate people for business, but they really only educate them to perform in some types of businesses and not in others. So almost all of the business schools teach people how to become individual entrepreneurs or to work in large corporations. They don't teach them how to work in cooperatives. We do at York have a non-profit program. It's really the only one in Canada. But we exclude a major part of the economy from our curriculum.
Do you see room for expansion of that here?
We do. In fact, we work with our nonprofit program here at York, and we've set up a certificate program for cooperative management in which we teach people who are actually managers in cooperatives about cooperatives, because those people fell into cooperatives and they never learned about them. They came from the traditional businesses and they bring all their skills and things that they learned there, but they're applying them in a different context, and they feel a little bit uneasy about doing that, and rightfully so, because cooperatives have cooperative principles that they're based upon, they have different governance structures, and they have different value commitments. And so there are some programs that are growing up. St. Mary's has a program, a master's program, in Cape Breton and Saskatchewan. There are different programs growing up, but they're still very few and far between.
You know, in terms of this question of is there room for expansion, I think the time is now, because given the financial crisis and the complete rethinking and challenges that have come to traditional disciplines. For example, when the financial crisis hit, the deans of the most major business schools in the US came out and said that, well, there's obviously a problem in the way we do our education. We need to rethink. In economics, at Harvard, students of Economics 101 walked out, saying that you're not teaching us how to correct the problems on Wall Street. You're teaching us to repeat the problems of Wall Street. And in general, there is a real consciousness now that the productive economy has gone is completely out of control from the hands of ordinary people. And I think so, to talk about alternative production structures, alternative governance models, this is the time. And it has to be done not in an ad hoc way, but just as conventional business does its education, very structured and through immersion in actual business experiences. And that's what we need to build into our education system as well. Dean Fall has talked about creating engaged citizens. I think we also need to, in that model of engaged citizens, we also need to include this, the engaged, the citizenship that also talks about building the alternative economy and not just the alternative politics. And these are very connected, and I think a place like York already has so much of the milieu in which this really serious thinking of alternative politics and alternative economics can be extended, and this is the moment to do it.
How would you go about doing that?
I'll tell you. We just recently got an academic innovation fund, a grant at York, and one of it was to develop experiential education opportunities for students in sustainable student-run businesses. And so what we've done is we've incorporated a cooperative, the Green Campus Cooperative, to provide experiential education opportunities for students to work in campus businesses that have a mandate specifically for environmentally and socially sustainable businesses. In line with that, we're also trying to develop curriculum. So we have worked with the nonprofit program in Schulich to offer a nonprofit certificate
How's
for
that
students.
Going?
That's going quite well.
The cooperation with Schulich.
Well, with the nonprofit program, it's going very well. Generally, Schulich could be more cooperative, we find sometimes. It depends a lot upon individuals. That's not unusual in universities. We haven't broken down all our silos. We still need to work on that. We've also been working with the School of Administrative Studies, and we're hoping to develop a new program with them to work on how you promote sustainable social enterprises. So a certificate program for students who aren't even in business schools but will end up in business. Most students, even if they're not in the business school, end up in business. But how do you work in social purpose businesses, especially around issues of sustainability? So that's two components. One is the businesses, educational experiences, curriculum, and then we've set up this cooperative as a business incubator so that students that have ideas for sustainable businesses on campus that we need, and we can think of lots of sustainable businesses that we need, can actually bring forward those ideas, and we can help them set up businesses in an environment that is secure for them so that students can still be students and not take on 60-hour work weeks, not invest their own money, and have a support system, which we have at universities. We have professors of business, we have professors of social science, we have professors of environmental studies, so they can provide a support structure for generating these businesses that students can engage in without taking, on full-time jobs and all the responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Is that something that you would eventually see becoming a department or a faculty?
Something to work on.
I mean, we're talking about a tipping point moment in history, at least to your work, perhaps.
So, yeah. Well, we have a program
in
in business and society which gives us one vehicle for doing that. Yeah. I think structures need to follow purpose. We will see where things develop.
Okay. Part of this is something I've noticed at the bookstore, where you can buy now Fairtrade Tshirt. Who knew? Fairtrade T-shirts. What's the story behind that?
Okay, that's another story. So, as Ananya was saying, we were not academics that fell into activism in a sense. Academics are people. They had other parts of their lives in teaching and research, and we're citizens, and we bring commitments to us when we come into academia. And we've both been involved in social movements before we came in, while we were in. And one of the commitments we've had is to how you undertake development in a way that really helps people at the base and that works from the bottom up. And so we've had these commitments over the years, and we work with all sorts of organizations, including fair trade movements. And we were part of a larger SSHRC grant, which was on the social economy. And it's a wonderful grant, and one of the projects we were doing as an action research, because we thought there's no better way to find out about things and how they run than by trying to do it, right? And so there's lots of research around fair trade, and we said, if we really want to find out about how fair trade works, let's try and create a whole new fair trade product from scratch. And we will learn everything all the way from production all the way up to finance and everything in between. And let's try and do that in a way that's in line with the values that we think development should operate. And so we were trying to create a project which focused on what we see as we're probably the primary agents of development, which is marginalized women. And so how can we bring a project about which centers on their work, their activity, and bring that to fruition, and see how that works. And so that's how that started. And we focused then on a new fair trade product at the time was cotton. And we had worked previously with a fair trade coffee company in Guelph. We approached them and they said, would you be willing to work with us? Because if we're going to have a business, somebody's got to import stuff here and people have to produce it there. And so this was the project. How can we bring that all together? Can we find producers in India who want to create fair trade cotton products? How can we find people here who want to sell fair trade products? And this was our research project.
So,
did you consider that part of your academic mandate as a professor to be involved in this kind of enterprise?
Well, I guess technically speaking, we are involved only on the research side of things. So our task was to identify producers who would be interested in alternative fair trade production, and people here who are fair trade producers who would want to bring that work and sell. So we were basically just a knowledge network between the two. So when we went to India on a sabbatical and on this project, we came across two things. First was that the situation with cotton in India at that time was a really crucial one. There were farmer suicides happening in the cotton sector because farmers were greatly indebted and could not pay their debt. And when they were committing suicide, what they were leaving behind were widows and orphans. And so there was a real crisis in cotton production. And then we also came to know about India's cotton export sector, which is a boom sector. It's very high profit sector. But the people who really work those sector are marginalized women, poor women between 18 to 35, who have absolutely no control, know their benefits they get are very, very little. So we thought, is it possible then to connect some growers who are in crisis and some women who would produce it, but within an alternative chain? So we could find one enterprise in India which actually employed not only poor marginalized women but also women with disability to produce organic fair trade cotton t-shirts. And so we talked to our Ontario partners, which is a cooperative, a fair trade cooperative, and we asked them, so could we somehow bring this to Ontario? And then that's how it was brought. And now, the York bookstore was happy to buy it and put the York logo, because these are 100% organic and fair trade, produced by women with, as I said, not only poor but also with disability. And the structure was much less hierarchical than conventional businesses. But now we are thinking of hoping to move another step forward, where we have identified a very large women's movement who have set up a women's consortium, cotton producing consortium. And they are cooperatives, it's democratically organized, they are owners, they are producers. And so they would be producing these, and then that would be imported by the Ontario cooperative to complete the chain. And our perhaps utopian dream is to have a complete women-owned, women-controlled chain from what we call from seed to the finished shirt. But we have some ways to go before that.
Interesting. Just to take a step back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier, this being a moment of the possibility of change in the Occupy movement and all of that. Do you notice in your students a sense, have you noticed a change in your students? Have you noticed that there is pressure on you to take them in the direction of looking at alternatives to the status quo and so on, more than in the past? Or is that something that we think of as academics?
I think students are looking for different alternatives, right? You know, one of the students in my class the other day, she's going to go off to law school, and she said, you know, I was going to travel around Europe, but what I really want to do next summer is go volunteer someplace. They do want to be engaged, they want to do things, but they don't see possibilities that are readily available. There's channels which we set up for them to go through, and they tend to march through those channels with varying degrees of enthusiasm. A lot are looking for other ways to go, other paths. And often they happen into those, they fall into them through some sort of placement project or internship program, and they find out about them almost by accident. And so they're investigating, but they're not sure what they're trying to find out. So we do feel that, but more than anything, what we feel is the enthusiasm when they discover possibilities for doing things differently.
Yes, I think a privilege of being at the university, any university, is having these young people who are willing to work with you and who you can work with. I think that's really a privilege we have. I see, you know, as you asked me if we see any changes, I see two sort of contradictory set of changes. One is students are increasingly indebted, debt burden is higher. Sometimes with this attack on universities and saying, oh, just get a narrow skill, university degrees are not going to take you anywhere, they feel very pessimistic about what happens after 4 years with my debt burden. Their parents are often in debt, they're new immigrants. So there is one side, this is one side. The other side is what Darryl was describing, that, I mean, it is so easy to light, to get that enthusiasm. You know, if you talk about a project or if you say you can do this, and every day my students ask me, so what can I do? Tell us. I mean, when we do the structural analysis of how the financial crisis on Wall Street is ripping the world apart and there's military expansion, etc., etc. After all of that, they will say, so tell me, what can I do? And that is why I feel that if there is a moment where we as academic citizens, whatever, have a role to play in the lives of these, I don't know, 50,000 young people who come to this campus, it is now to say that the reality of the debt and the prospects are true, but it is not true that nothing can be done. And let us see how we can participate in creating alternatives that make, and I think even the process of envisioning that and participating in it makes students feel more empowered. Otherwise, they go through this period of uncertainty, where the only thing you're certain of is the debt burden and the jobs you need to do to pay it off, but not really your prospects. And these are real prospects that can open up. And I think we really have both the opportunity and the responsibility to make those things at least visible, if not possible.
Yeah.